No one noticed when he walked in. Not the man at the door, not the waiter, not the group of laughing young people making noise near the bar. He quietly sat at an empty table in the corner of the restaurant. His coat was too thin for the season, his pants were worn at the cuffs, and his shoes had clearly walked through years. His hair was unkempt, his beard uneven. But in his eyes there was a strange calm, a powerful silence. It was an elegant restaurant. Crystal pitchers stood in the center of every table. The waiters wore suits. Soft jazz hummed in the background. And there he was, a man who seemed like he didn't belong. The youngest waiter was the first to notice him. He gave a quick glance, then looked away. What looked like indifference was actually a quiet judgment. Minutes passed, no water, no menu, nothing. The man sat in silence. He didn't ask for anything. At the next table, two men leaned toward each other and whispered. "Smells like he hasn't bathed," one said under his breath. The other chuckled. "Look at those clothes. What's he even doing here?" Maybe he didn't hear them. Maybe he did. But he didn't care. He hadn't come to this place expecting anything. He just wanted to sit, to watch, to simply exist for a while, to be present like everyone else, without being stared at, without being looked down on. But apparently, this was not that kind of place. From the large mirror on the wall behind him, he caught a glimpse of himself, an old face, tired eyes, but a posture that was still upright, still proud. And in that quiet moment, he thought just one thing. People burn in the reflections of how others choose to see them. Eventually, the waiter came over. No menu in hand, no greeting, just a cold sentence like he could barely stand the man's presence. "This area is reservation only," he said without even looking at him. The man nodded. "I understand," he said simply, but he didn't get up, because this table wasn't for eating, not for him. It was a place of testing, a quiet exam. And that test was just beginning. As the waiter walked away from the table, he shook his head, as if to say, well, of course this would happen. Just a few minutes later, he was whispering with the other waiters in the corner. Their eyes were still fixed on the man. One of them laughed. "Looks like we let a philosopher in today," he said mockingly. Another wrinkled his nose. "Please, he probably can't even pay the bill. He'll ask for a tea and sit there for hours." But the man was still sitting there, as if he hadn't heard a thing, when in fact, he had heard it all. None of this was new to him. Most of his life had passed under the shadow of those looks. People's eyes always spoke before their mouths did. And he had learned how to listen to those eyes. Eventually, the waiter returned to the table. This time, he had a menu in hand. But the impatience in his body language was hard to miss. He didn't even place the menu on the table. He held it as if to say, "Don't bother looking. You can't afford it anyway." "We have scallop risotto and braised lamb shank today," he said sharply, "but I'm afraid they may be out of your price range." His eyes scanned the man's shoes, the frayed thread on his pants. The man looked up. He met the waiter's gaze, a short but steady glance. "I'll have a soup," he said, "and a glass of water, please." His voice was soft but firm. The waiter sighed audibly. "Fine," he muttered, and walked away. At the next table, a woman pulled her purse closer to her side. Across from her, the man she was with lifted his phone and quietly snapped a photo. He was clearly one of those people who posted odd strangers on social media for laughs. The man noticed, but still he didn't react. He wasn't here to defend himself. He wasn't waiting for pity. He was waiting to be seen. He leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, there was no waiter, no laughter, only silence. But outside, everyone misunderstood that silence. No one knew that beneath it, there echoed a voice far louder than they could ever hear. When his soup arrived, the waiter practically dropped the bowl onto the table. No spoon. The man said nothing. He looked at the bowl, then slowly reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled out a small, rusted teaspoon. It was clear. He had come prepared in his own way. At that moment, three young men at the next table glanced over at him. One straightened the collar of his blazer. Another adjusted his luxury watch so it was more visible. "Look at that," one of them muttered under his breath. He's ruining the image of the place. They chuckled. Another pulled out his phone and quietly started recording video. The man noticed. He didn't turn his head, but as he sipped his soup, a subtle twitch appeared on his jaw. A small gesture, the most elegant reflection of a rage long suppressed. One of the young men raised his voice, loud enough to be heard. I mean, seriously, if you're going to help the guy, do it outside. People come here to enjoy a proper meal. A short silence fell across the restaurant. Some diners looked up. Others just smiled faintly. Some lowered their heads and returned to their food. The modern form of ignoring. The man took his last spoonful of soup, placed the spoon gently on the rim of the bowl, then slowly lifted his head and looked into the mirror across the room. Right at the young men. They met eyes, just for a second. But that second was enough for one of them to flinch slightly. In the man's gaze, there was no anger, no shame, only deep awareness. He had chosen that look deliberately. Not defensive, not confrontational, just a look that said, I hear you, but you don't know me. The waiter returned. This time he didn't bring the bill. Would you like anything else? His tone, now uncertain, hesitant. The man shook his head gently. No, it's time. But no one yet knew what time it truly was. The soup bowl had been taken away. Now there was only a half-filled glass of water left on the table. The man leaned back slightly, turned his head toward the waiter, and spoke. Not loud, not soft, just firm. May I see the menu? The waiter's steps immediately slowed. He paused. For a moment, his eyes seemed to ask, what's the point? But he didn't say it. His face tightened just a little. Of course, he said coldly, then turned toward the kitchen. Behind the bar, he leaned toward another waiter and rolled his eyes mockingly. Guy had a glass of water, and now he wants the menu. Back at the table, the man wasn't looking at the waiter. He was quietly studying the menu board hanging on the wall. The prices were high, the portions small. But this wasn't about cost or hunger. It was about presence, proving he was there, that he existed. When the waiter returned with the menu, he placed it on the table gently, but without a smile. Even as he stepped back, his face remained stiff. The man studied the menu for a moment. Then he pointed to the very last line, today's special. What exactly is that? The waiter shrugged. Duck with truffle mushrooms. It's expensive, he said. And in the tone of that last word was something else entirely. Too expensive. For you. The man nodded. Still looking at the menu, he replied, I'll have that. The waiter nearly laughed out loud, but restrained himself. He simply offered a quick, clipped, all right, and walked away. As he turned his back, the whispers began again. Is he serious? Truffle duck? Let's see if his card even works. But the man didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't respond, because in his mind he was already seated at a different table, a table where respect, recognition, and being human were still considered valuable. That table wasn't in this restaurant, but soon he was going to show it to everyone. The order seemed to echo in everyone's ears. Duck with truffle mushrooms. It wasn't just expensive, it was the most exclusive dish on the menu. And the man who had ordered it, wearing an old coat, sitting quietly, sipping only water, still didn't look like he belonged there in anyone's eyes. When the waiter entered the kitchen, he approached the head chef with a grin. Ayhan, special order from table 1, he said casually. Ayhan took off his gloves and frowned. That table? You mean the guy who doesn't look like a guest? The waiter laughed. Exactly. Had a soup, now he wants the duck. Let's see if he's this calm when it's time to pay. The other kitchen staff began whispering too. Some laughed, others shrugged, but they all shared one belief. That man doesn't belong here. Back in the dining area, the atmosphere had shifted. Heavier now. Most of the guests were watching the man, some openly, some discreetly, as if they were waiting for something to fall, to see the real face of a man they were convinced was pretending. But the man sat with his head lowered, staring into the reflection in his glass of water. There was the weariness of years in his eyes, and yet a calm that was almost unsettling. One waiter whispered to another, "What do you think he does for a living?" "No clue, but whatever it is, he's definitely not rich. No rich man sits like that." How wrong they were, because in just a few minutes, the entire restaurant was going to find out the truth. By the time the food arrived, the entire restaurant had quieted. The clinking of forks and knives was now laced with something else, a growing curiosity. The waiter set the plate down with an exaggerated motion, as if to say, "Are you sure you want this?" In the center of the dish sat the elegantly plated duck with truffle mushrooms, a symbol of the restaurant's prestige. But the man said nothing. He picked up his knife. With precise, deliberate movements, he began to eat. He wasn't in a hurry, he wasn't shy. He was just calm. Some guests were still watching him, but now not all with judgment, some with wonder. Because how could someone looked down on by so many eat with such grace and quiet confidence? At the next table over, a woman slowly set down her fork. She turned to her husband. "Who do you think he is?" The man shrugged. "Maybe he's no one." But just then, one of the waiters returned from the kitchen and leaned toward his colleague. "I saw his card," he whispered. "Gold-colored. No name on it, just a logo." The other blinked. "What kind of logo?" "I don't know," he replied, "but it looks like something high-end." That tiny detail sparked a flame, because now it wasn't just appearance being discussed. It was mystery. Meanwhile, the man continued his meal in silence. His face showed no pride, no need to defend himself, only peace with eyes. He finished the last bite, folded his napkin neatly, lifted his water with both hands, and took a slow sip. Then he leaned back. He didn't glance around. He looked at no one. But by now, everyone was looking at him, because this man's silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt commanding. And that silence spoke louder than any words. After placing his napkin beside the plate, the man lifted his head slightly. With a gentle gesture, he signaled to a waiter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call out. He simply reminded them he was there. The waiter pretended not to notice at first, but when he realized several tables were still watching the man, he had no choice but to approach. "Yes?" he asked, voice cold. Without looking up, in a calm, almost gentle tone, the man said, "Could I have the check, please?" The words echoed strangely in the waiter's ears. Suddenly, all of his assumptions collapsed. The check? Was he really going to pay for that expensive a meal? The waiter's expression froze. Something inside him cracked. Just hours earlier, he'd seen this man as nothing more than a seat filler. Now, the man was asking for the check, in every sense of the word. "Of course, sir," the waiter replied, trying to steady his voice. The word "sir" slipped out, unintentionally, but everyone heard the difference. He turned briskly toward the register. When he caught the eye of the cashier, his glance clearly said, "Can you handle this one?" As he walked toward the door, no one followed him. No one called out, but everyone stayed silent. That silence wasn't just the hush of a crowd caught in shame. It was a moment of awakening. Without even knowing who the man truly was, no one dared judge him by appearance anymore. Just as he reached the door, the youngest waiter in the restaurant, the one who had only brought water and quickly left, called out hesitantly, "Sir, may I ask your name?" The man stopped, but he didn't turn around. A few seconds passed. Then with a calm voice, he said, "You don't need to know my name, but never forget how you look at people." With those final words, he opened the door. Outside, a cool wind brushed past him. His shirt lifted ever so slightly in the breeze. And then he slowly disappeared down the street. Inside the restaurant, dozens of people struggled to return to their meals because the food no longer tasted the same. The chairs no longer felt as comfortable, and the mirrors no longer reflected the same people. Because one man had come in. He was silent. He had only ordered a simple bowl of soup. He never raised his voice. He gave no speeches. But through his quiet presence alone, he had taught an unforgettable lesson in humanity. But the cashier just nodded toward him. "You take it." Minutes passed. When the waiter returned, his hand was shaking slightly. He placed the small black check holder on the table, this time much more carefully. The man opened it slowly. From his pocket, he pulled out a sleek black card. No name, no numbers. Just a fine gold emblem embossed at the center. The waiter's eyes widened. It was one of those cards, an elite invitation-only club card, the kind only a select few ever even see. "Will this work?" the man asked. The waiter nodded. "Yes, right away." There was a slight tremble in his voice. Seconds later, a clear beep from the payment terminal rang out. Approved. In that moment, the restaurant fell completely silent, because a few tables had witnessed what just happened, and what they'd seen wasn't just a payment, it was the quiet triumph of dignity. When the waiter returned with the POS machine, he was still trying to make sense of the card in his hand. Matte black, textured surface, a small gold emblem in the center. No bank logo, no printed name. Yet some top-tier restaurant staff had seen such a card once before, maybe never. The man gently tapped the card on the terminal. Beep, one single sound. But it drowned out every other noise in the restaurant. The device approved the transaction and printed a small receipt. Then the man pointed calmly around the room. "This isn't just for my table," he said softly. "Can we take care of everyone here today?" The waiter blinked. He leaned in slightly, needing to be sure. "Sir, you mean everyone in the restaurant?" The man nodded. "Yes, let everyone's meal be on me. Let people be judged not by where they come from, but by the humanity they carry." In that instant, the atmosphere shifted, not just the air, but glances, postures, even heartbeats. The group of young men at the next table looked at one another, then quietly turned their eyes to the man. A woman placed her napkin on the table and folded her hands in her lap. Mocking expressions faded, replaced by something deeper. Respect. The waiter, stunned, walked briskly to the register. After a brief conversation, he returned and bowed slightly. "It's confirmed, sir. All the checks are now under your name." The man gave a small nod. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. He simply lowered his gaze and stood. One by one, guests at nearby tables began to rise, but none of them dared stop him, because now they understood. They had been the ones who judged him. And without judging anyone, without raising his voice, he had made himself seen. With the quiet confirmation tone of the PE machine, something in the restaurant shifted. It was as if an invisible curtain had been lifted. First, the whisper stopped. Then, the sound of cutlery faded. And then, almost in unison, every head turned toward him. The man still stood where he was, shoulders upright, eyes lowered. But that posture in everyone's eyes now had become a symbol of silent strength. The waiter who had just moments ago looked at him with arrogance was now red in the face. The hostess who had turned her back when he entered now avoided his gaze. The young men at the neighboring table had bowed their heads, and the man who had taken his photo quietly slipped his phone back into his pocket. The man took a deep breath. He looked around the room one last time, but he still said nothing, because this silence was louder than anything words could say. As the restaurant manager, having learned what happened, approached with brisk steps, the man was already putting on his coat. The manager, trying to patch together a sense of order, began to speak. "Sir, such a gesture, it's very kind of you, but really it wasn't necessary." The man tilted his head slightly. "It was," he said, his voice clear for the first time. "Because what you value most here isn't the food. It's how people look at one another. Today, I just wanted everyone to remember what they're looking at and what they're choosing not to see." His words spread through the room like a cold wave. And then, a warmth followed. For the first time, people truly met each other's eyes, and the man quietly walked toward the door. No one applauded, but in that moment, something far more powerful filled the room. Respect. And that is something no money can ever buy.